All right, great. Thanks, everybody. It's great to be here as part of this event. I'm Ted Miguel from Berkeley, and I'll be speaking about rural electrification in Kenya. And this is joint work with a large team based here at Berkeley. We're also delighted to have a long-term collaborator from Kenya here, Samson Ondiak, as well as some other members of the research team who are here today. The challenge that we address is the challenge of electrification. You can see on this map of nightlights that large parts of the developing world are not electrified, and that's particularly the case in sub-Saharan Africa, which you can see is very dark on this map, even though there's almost 1 billion people living in sub-Saharan Africa. And in the last few years, it's become actually a major priority to enhance the provision of electricity services in sub-Saharan Africa, where half of the people around the world who don't have electricity live. It's become a major policy priority for many national governments, including the national government of Kenya, as I'll discuss. It's also a major foreign aid priority. Major donors are putting billions of dollars into electrification as we speak. We've done earlier work on this topic with co-authors, and that was the project that we worked with Samson and his colleagues on. We provided experimental evidence on what happens when electricity is extended to rural households. How does it change their lives? How does it change their incomes? How does it change their education? And that project took place in a setting which is the relevant Kenyan setting for this study, in which the government has actually already extended a lot of the backbone electricity grid infrastructure. They've connected, at this point, the vast majority of schools and clinics. So most people actually live close to a transformer, but still the majority of people in rural areas do not have a connection. So that's the relevant setting, and that's going to be the policy environment that's relevant for us. And you can kind of get an image here, a pretty representative image of a community, one of the communities we worked with in Western Kenya. The T in the middle is the transformer. There's a radius of 600 meters around that transformer, the standard connection distance within which Kenya Power will connect residential customers. And you can see, different homes scattered around in the different circles. The green households are unconnected. The yellow are connected. And this was a snapshot from a few years ago when our project started, and you can see very few were connected. And this was a very typical situation. So a few years ago, only about 5% of rural Kenyan households were connected to the grid, even though most of them live near a transformer. So that's the what we call the undergrid households, or the undergrid challenge. What happens when households do get connected? Engineers go out to the site, they build poles, they connect households, they wire them within their house. There's a whole series of construction and engineering steps that need to occur. You can see here that households tend to be sort of spread out. So the issues of tapping into the grid or stealing power from your neighbor aren't really relevant in this kind of rural setting, because you'd have to build poles typically to connect to your neighbor's home. So it's a different setting than maybe some urban settings that you've heard of with lots of tapping into power. So what is this project, the EDI-funded project? We're studying the provision of rural electrification through a massive new government program called the Last Mile Connectivity Project, which aims to get Kenya close to universal coverage in the next few years. Millions of households are being connected. It's a major program. And I'll talk about some of the governance and political economy challenges that come up in a program like this, and how our study hopes to make progress in understanding how to provide these services more effectively. So what is this LMCP project? It's a major initiative of the current government. It's seen as a major accomplishment. Many millions of Kenyans are being connected to the grid for the first time. It's mainly funded by foreign aid donors with very large World Bank and African Development Bank investments in the sector. So these are multi-$100-million investments over multiple years. The way it's being implemented is the way Kenya Power typically will build out rural grid, which is contracting with private companies. So there are private firms, 40-something private firms, that are hired by Kenya Power to deliver these services, to build out these poles, to connect these households. So this actually introduces some interesting issues of regulation, auditing, accountability, because there's private contractors actually doing the work. And here are just some numbers to give you a sense of the scale. Thousands of transformers are in the project, with maybe 100 households or 50 to 100 households in a community being connected in each of these transformers. Each of these households has 5 to 7 people, so you can see where the millions are coming from here. This is a very large project, and sort of phase 2 is launching now. So this is the scope of the project. Despite all the progress that's being made, despite the millions that are being connected, which is a real policy success, there are a lot of challenges in this program. In our earlier work, we documented some of them. So as part of our earlier project, where we estimated impacts of rural households being connected in rural Kenya, we also documented certain aspects of the construction process in the communities that we worked in. So for instance, we got the plans for which when particular households were to be connected, where poles would be built, where wiring would be placed. And we went on the ground and compared the plans to what was actually constructed on the ground. And we found that a large share of poles went missing. About 21% of poles that were supposed to be put in the ground disappeared, and anecdotally and based on the observation of our field staff, some of the contractors were sort of acquiring materials and misusing them, selling them. So there was corruption and leakage in this process. When they invoice their travel distance to actually move supplies from the depot in a city to these rural areas, they overstated travel costs relative to what we mapped on Google Maps by about 33%. So again, this is on some level a very successful project. Millions of households are being connected, but there's substantial leakage and corruption that's part of the process. And anecdotally, there's the quite frequent occurrence of self-dealing. Some local Kenya Power staff may have some self-dealing relationships with the private contractors. And that is what is leading to some of this corruption. Beyond those challenges of leakage, there's very long delays to get connected. It could take 6 months. Some local staff, again, want a bribe in order to speed up that process. Grid reliability is low. In the course of 1 year, in the sample we worked in Western Kenya, 1 out of 5 transformers blew out, and the average repair time was 4 months. So in California, the average repair time is 4 hours, just to kind of give you a sense. Huge differences. So there's a range of public service provision and quality issues that are very important, even in a program that is providing services. I'm not caricaturing this program. Millions are getting power. Millions of people's lives have the possibility of improvement, but with a lot of inefficiency. Again, there's lots of reports of individuals being asked to dig holes for the poles instead of the contractor doing it, being asked to pay bribes. Some households get multiple connections, so they have to pay for multiple meters even if they didn't ask for it. And there's a lot of evidence that the quality of the construction, of the installation, varies across sites. So for instance, when poles are put in the ground, they may not be put in straight. They may be tilting. So this is just one example of pole tilt. Sometimes when households are connected, they're not really connected. This is a live wire in someone's home that the contractor had left. I just never connected it. So these are extreme cases, of course, but there are real issues of construction quality. And this is what we're interested in. How can the delivery of this service be improved in a setting with widespread leakage, corruption, and a lot of this self-dealing, especially between private contractors and the utility? That's one of the very important relationships that we've seen on the ground firsthand. So let me tell you what we do. The core of this new project is a randomized controlled trial that's attempting to improve accountability through monitoring of construction quality. So we've worked with engineers in Kenya. We've worked with engineers in Kenya Power, in the Rural Electrification Authority, to develop a very detailed engineering assessment of construction quality to make sure construction is safe, to make sure there are fuses in the transformer box, to make sure that lines aren't intersecting trees, which could lead to outages, et cetera. So there's a whole range of engineering measures that we'll be collecting in 600 communities in Western Kenya, Western Province, Nyanza, and Rift Valley, for people familiar with that part of Kenya. There's also going to be very detailed household surveys to measure the household experience where they asked for a bribe. How has their service quality been? How has service reliability been? So we'll be measuring the objective engineering and construction quality and also household experiences. in 600 communities. The intervention is in a random subset of these communities, contractors, the private contractors, are informed that their performance will be monitored. So we give them a letter signed by leaders in Kenya Power, World Bank, and AfDB, the funders, informing them that there will be independent audits. So these are beyond the audits that are already done within Kenya Power. Again, in a context of potential collusion with private contractors, independent audits could be useful. That's the idea underlying the RCT. And the auditing will take the form of these very detailed engineering assessments and household surveys to understand the construction quality. We list out the construction aspects we're going to monitor, so they know what we're going to be looking for, and we give them a list of the sites that we'll be visiting. Now, those sites that they're informed we'll be visiting are a subset of the broader sample of 600 sites, which we'll be monitoring. So the treatment is informing contractors about the monitoring. There's a broader collection of sites that we'll be monitoring, the 600. There's a randomization to the treatment and control of the monitoring. And the first wave, actually, of letters has gone out to contractors. So we've actually started the intervention of informing contractors just because the building is going on. The first wave of randomization has occurred. We've informed the contractors. And as soon as funding hits in Kenya, we'll be starting the survey assessments. So this is where the project is right now. Because of our very close collaboration, our memorandum of understanding with Kenya Power, and the support we've gotten from high-level officials in Kenya Power, many of whom are just as interested as we are, if not more, in understanding how to address these issues. We also have very rich secondary data, administrative data, that we've been working with on project completion, other project characteristics, geolocation, which will really enrich the data environment. So this is the main experiment. In just the last 30 seconds, I want to mention two other things, very closely related topics that we can use the data for. So let me just jump ahead. The first one is different donors are funding some of these sites. And the two donors, the World Bank and the African Development Bank, have very different accountability regimes themselves. The contracting is much more onerous through the World Bank than through the AfDB, precisely for anti-corruption reasons. So our partners in Kenya Power have said that it may take much longer to get projects going and funding moving through the World Bank than it does through the AfDB. We're going to see if that translates into different construction quality on the ground. Do all these checks and all this accountability and all this anti-corruption effort mean there's less leakage in the World Bank sites? Maybe better construction quality, better contractor performance? It's a very important issue in the foreign aid world. We always talk about conditionality, and people say, oh, conditionality, it's burdensome. Well, does it have a payoff? We're going to be able to measure that. And the sites are actually scattered all around Kenya, including in neighboring communities that are observably very similar. So it'll be a quasi-experimental design with local constituency fixed effects here. And then the final one is, are there political or electoral incentives that constrain performance and actually lead to better performance? So here, the areas that we work in, we chose them deliberately, have some very strong pro-government and pro-opposition areas right next to each other, really bordering each other, very similar socioeconomic characteristics, similar electricity characteristics. Is it the case that the political orientation of a community also affects construction quality, leakage, etc.? So we don't have much in the way of definitive results. Here we have some early suggestive evidence that there may be some political bias, but it's still early days with our data. There's certainly a large body of evidence in political economy suggesting that pro-government areas, not just in Kenya, but many other low-income countries, pro-government areas do get favored. We're going to be able to test that in this setting as well. And these are the areas that we're working in.
Would you say a little bit more about, how come you get a quasi-government assignment of the World Bank versus the African Development Bank? I would guess there's some economies of scale, no? Getting some contractors in a few areas.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Yeah, so they're very scattered around, maybe even surprisingly so. The lots that are given to contractors funded through these different schemes are not segregated in the way you would think. And you saw on the map, they're overlapping. By all accounts, there's no systematic reason. So again, it isn't truly experimental, but let's say in Western region, there could be 4 or 5 contractors working there, and there could be there are World Bank and AfDB sites sort of in many different constituencies. So I'm not sure exactly why that's the way it is, but it works to our advantage for the analysis.
Is there a way to check that there wasn't some selection based exactly on that? The AfDB doesn't have to deal with all these things, so maybe in the sites,
It could be. These are certainly the things we'll be looking for. We've done some early checks on observables in the areas, and in fact, just with some of the administrative data, and didn't find strong differences, but it's still, we're kind of launching that analysis now. But at least the first cut of observables look very similar. And again, these very often are neighboring communities in the same ward. So at first glance, it looks promising, but we may find variables that are imbalanced in the future. Bilal?
This is so great, not least because it makes us, the World Bank, look good.
Unless nothing ever gets built, that's funded by the World Bank.
Anyway, but so I was actually thinking, so building on Pierre's point, like at some level, most of the selection is happening already at the point when the contractors are identified and selected. Right. And then, so that would be really interesting if you had a fair information on on the past performance of the contractors. You could think about what kinds of procurement processes actually create what kinds of contractual relationships. But then, particularly, there's going to be a lot of movement in the future when, if and when there's consequences to poor construction, contracts get terminated and there's some turnaround, and you see a different distribution of contractors and contractual arrangements and procurement processes even and so on. So just wondering if you're planning to move in that direction.
So far, again, we've set up a very productive data relationship with Kenya Power, and we've been getting regular sort of data sharing with our team. So if that continues, we will be able to track some of the turnover that you talked about. I think for this initial stage, we're focused on some of these initial questions, but we hope that relationship continues because we'll be able to look at these kinds of issues. And Andy?
It'd be interesting to know, I guess it's in the kind of basket of observational questions, whether one of the drivers of contractors skimming through poor delivery is the inefficiencies induced by these lots. We might have variation in some lots are compact and attractive, and some lots
That's interesting.
are really unfavorable places to work, and you might skim more when you're working in an inconvenient lot. It'd be interesting to compare, if that is the case, it'd be interesting to compare the kind of quality consequences of this donor-funded scattered mechanism versus the kinds of auditing.
That's really interesting. I mean, we can characterize that because we know the location of the sites in each of the lots. So we can get a sense of how spread out they are, and we also have a sense of road quality in those areas. So I haven't thought about exactly how to quantify, but I think we could, just getting geographic spread. And so let me think more about that, but that's a really interesting direction.
Oh yeah, in fact, do you have enough power to randomize the content of the letter? Because one natural response, if you're going to list the things that are going to be audited, is for them to shift the corruption to some of the other items in which they can have control over that you're not going to audit. So it'd be interesting to see if you can detect that type of.
I see. So have like a version of the letter where instead of listing the 8 things, we list 4 or something.
Yeah, exactly, and see if you.
We're pretty well powered. I mean, as is, because of the 600 sites and we have pretty detailed information. We're powered at to detect effects of 0.1 standard deviation unit, something like that, for the main randomization. So we may be able to do a subgroup treatment. And we're going to be sending letters out in waves because there are all these lots. So we've done the first one. Yeah. So we could modify the design so in later lots we introduce a cross randomization. So that's an interesting idea.
Liz?
Just the comment of spillovers, I suppose, because are these contractors all working for the same company? Are they just going to talk to each other? If someone gets a letter saying that there's going to be monitoring, are they just going to call around and tell everyone?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Most of the contractors are getting letters, but it's for a subset of their sites. So they're actually told, here is the list. You're building out 80 sites. We don't tell them here are the 80. We know that from Kenya Power, but here are the 20 sites where monitoring will take place. So there's a spillover, you're talking about the spillover across contractors, but all the contractors are going to be getting some letters pretty much. It's more, we're very concerned about, maybe spillovers across sites within the same contractor, but because we're highlighting these specific areas, we're keen to get a sense of, are they doing a better job there than the other site.